So my name is Nat, and I am the head of community at a lovely social organisation called Exceptional Individuals. For those of you who have not heard of us, we support people who are, believe it or not, neurodivergent. That would include dyslexia, dyspraxia, autism, ADHD, dyscalculia, dysgraphia, Tourette's, OCD, maybe a few others. And we are going to be talking about what are those others and what does that really define. So, dyslexia, dyspraxia, autism, ADHD. Is that neurodiversity? Not really, no. But we are going to be looking into what even is neurodiversity. Today's lesson is called the abstract idea, and that's because ultimately it is just an idea. And we're going to look at where the idea came from, where it works, where it doesn't work. Now, here is a bit about our team. We've been going since about 2015. We have a lovely model where we support individuals for free, and we work with big organizations to help make people more inclusive. We're, I don't want to brag, but we're pretty good at consultancy, recruitment, and employment. But what makes us really unique is that 80% of our team is neurodivergent, including myself. So we're experts via experience, but also qualified professionals. Okay. So now you know a bit about us. We do these webinars every single week now. This is the first one of the year, and then it goes on forever. The last one we did was autism and education. So do check out our YouTube channel, like and subscribe, ring that little bell, because it shows us that people are interested in the subject and really encourages us, empowers us to make more. So the abstract idea of neurodiversity, we are going to be going into looking at bit of the history, what we think of it, why it's a thing, why some people do not like it, why does it exist in the first place. But my first question to you is, what attitude do people typically have towards your ND? Now, if any of you aren't neurodivergent, then maybe you talk about it just in general. But I'm supposing that quite a lot of you do resonate with being neurodiverse today. Are people typically quite negative if you say, oh, I have dyslexia? Oh, you can't read? Or are they like, whatever? Or are they like positive, like, you go? I think for me, it really depends on the circumstances, and it also depends on the age, your location. Like, speaking from a UK perspective, most people under 35 tend to be very positive about it. But other than that, views do differ a little bit. Oh, Helen, maybe you think a bit negative. What about yours? For anyone who's not in the UK, I'd love to know, what is the general consensus of how people views and thoughts towards people, say, with autism, ADHD, dyspraxia, dyslexia? Okay, at the moment, we got more negative than anything. That is not what we want to hear in 2023. A few neutral and only a couple of positive. Oh no, Patricia says negative. Anna says, I get a lot. We all have ADHD. Then when I disclosed, oh yeah, people love to say, you know what? I'm pretty certain I've got it as well. And I'm like, it's a tough one, isn't it? Because you don't want to exclude people who are self-declare because diagnoses are expensive, but you also don't want to undermine the challenges that you've been through. So for us to really understand what exactly is neurodiversity, it's nice to rewind the clock a little bit and do a bit of a history perspective. Gorata says people treat you like you're incompetent and they infantilize you. Yeah, people love like talking to me like I'm like a kid, even though I still look quite young. Stuart said, if you're trying to get a job, there's ableist within the account. Yeah, ableist is a thing. Oh, you've done well. Yeah. Have you taken your meds lately? Oh, nice. I used to always get told, you know, right there, that's your autistic characteristics talking. No, that's just me. But really interesting. So first of all, where does autism, and we have to start with autism first because that is the OG ND. And you said sometimes people think it's a made up thing. Okay, so, a few think it's due to vaccines. Other people aren't sure. Most of you say genetics. Now, the truth is, do we really know what autism comes from? Well, it is genetics, but truthfully, we don't really know. We don't know the exact gene or exactly is it a combination of nature v nurture? But we do know is it's not due to vaccines and it's not due to not being hugged. However, people used to think that for a very, very long time, people thought it was due to people just not loving you enough or kind of getting jabbed with the wrong injection. It wasn't great. And this brings us nicely on to the old refrigerator mother. If in doubt and you're not sure why your child's acting a little bit different, blame the mother. And this was a big thing in like the 70s and the 90s, where this term refrigerator mother came off. Why refrigerator? Because refrigerators are chilly. And if your mum was cold for you, didn't love you enough, didn't give you the right hugs that you deserved, you were the reason why your child had autism. So if someone knew that your child had autism, it was essentially stigmatizing you as the parent. As to why it was mother and not father, you can put that down to good old sexism. So this was kind of like the birth of the stigma. Why do people who are of the older generation not like talking about being neurodiverse or kind of talking about autism in the family? It's because they often saw it as a reflection of themselves, and no one wants to be seen as a bad parent. Oh, Helen says, people still say today that the vaccine caused ASD. I've been told this week. Ugh, that is backwards. We are all brothers from different mothers. Our mothers come from the sky. All right, Christian. Yeah, really interesting. Oh, April says, I have autism and I think people I know understand it and others don't. For example, they know that I like to have a routine, but they say that I like throwing a tantrum when I'm actually having a meltdown. You know what, April? I feel you on that one. So yeah, refrigerator mother came about. Obviously not true, but the thing is, mud sticks. So though this was done and dusted post-90s, this kind of overflow of society very much stayed. So a question I would like to pose to you is it possible to separate the person from the neurodivergence? So we're looking about like, is this something which is like, are you your own person and just happen to have autism? Or are you an autistic individual and it kind of is integral to your identity and who you are? It's probably worth mentioning that there isn't a right or wrong answer for any of these. A lot of these questions I'm posing to you are personal preference. Oh, Tim says unvaccinated parents can have children that possess ASD. Yeah, absolutely. So interestingly, quite a big, is it possible to separate the person from the neurodivergence? Few of you say yes, it is. And a few of you say no, it's not. Or it says, in my society, there's a belief that it is caused by witchcraft. Yeah, do you know what? I'm going to say probably not. But the fact is, people believe that. And then it creates a stigma. So whether or not you're a refrigerator mother or you are a cursed being from the demigods, the fact is these horrible stigmas have been included. Now, there's an interesting thing from Mr. Jim Sinclair, who's a great advocate and really promoted the cause. And he said, don't mourn for us. It is not possible to separate the person from the autism. And this, in many ways, was the birth of the neurodivergent or neurodiversity movement. For the first time, it's saying, you know what? Even if there was a cure, I ain't interested. This is who I am. You take this apart of me and I'm no longer me. So the 90s was definitely the birth of the kind of empowerment and the kind of neurodiverse individuals themselves kind of reclaiming the language and reclaiming their own diagnosis rather than other people kind of saying for them whether or not it's good or bad. Next question. With this in mind, what type of language do you prefer? Person first language or identity first? For those of you who do not know, person first language is, say, a person with dyslexia. Identity first language is a dyslexic person. Now, this is kind of, a bit, everyone has different views. And when organizations ask us, what type of language should we use? Honestly, it gets a bit challenging because it really depends at who you're asking, the culture, personal belief systems. Anna says, I say that you can separate the two. We often have neurodivergent struggles explained as personality traits, i.e. being lazy. And Fatima says, no, it reflects all of our aspects of us. Interesting. So here we've got quite a solid, a good balance between the two. So person-first language is interesting because this is actually falling out of favor at the moment. This is saying, I am a person with autism. And people sometimes like this one because it's saying you are your own person. Autism doesn't define who you are. But some people might say, well, you can't carry around autism. It's not like a handbag. It's not something like, yeah, I've got my autism today. You always have your autism because it is who you are. And that's why other people prefer identity first, where it's saying, hey, I'm an autistic individual. You know, this is me. I'm okay with it. You cannot have me without that. So interestingly, most people have said person first language, but there is definitely a trend moving to more people saying identity first. I prefer person first, but my son prefers identity first. That's really interesting, Helen. And I don't know, for me, I prefer identity first, but April, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you prefer person first. So it really depends, even in your own family or workplace, people can have different views on the identity that they personally connect with. So why might someone not resonate with a label like autistic, dyslexic, dyspraxic, or ADHD? We talked about the type of language you would use, but in terms of having like whether or not it's first person or identity first, is there a reason why people just would completely reject the idea of having any sort of label saying, oh, autism, autistic, dyslexic, dyslexia? Or April says, yes, I do prefer person with autism as opposed to autistic person. And you're completely right to say that. It's a very personal decision. Oh, Indigo says it's interchangeable for me. Yeah, maybe it doesn't bother you. So why might someone not resonate with a label like autism? Okay, we've got stigma or not prospects of, or not prospect of evolving. Interesting. Oh, Fatima says, you're person first. You can't present yourself as a diagnosis. Oh, and other people, okay, we've got wanting to confirm is a main one. Then it is denial of the condition because of stigma. It's not diagnosed and not want to be labeled as a negative way. Shy or ashamed. And I think you are, again, all right on this one. These diagnoses, these labels were created from a clinical diagnostic perspective. They were used to help support medical interventions if necessary. They weren't really ever designed to be used as everyday terms. And unfortunately, because these terms were poorly understood by the general public, like a snowball effect, they kind of got more and more kind of muddied almost, where this kind of negative stigma would be attached to them. So even though inherently these words aren't negative, society has done a pretty good job of kind of attaching negatives like lazy, no empathy, you know, not able to do this, you know, all these kind of negatives that are attached. Or the DSM, that's the diagnostic manual, only sees them as deficits. Safety is having a label. Oh, well, some people, it could also be safety by not using a label. It could work both ways. People only see the diagnosis and not who I am personality-wise. Nice, so yeah, maybe you just don't want to mention it. Yeah, I might not be the best at sports, but I don't want people to know I have dyspraxia. Oh, Fatima says you can mention later if you need to. Okay, we've got some really good ones here. Now, this is why, drumroll, neurodiversity was invented. Because these words started to get messy. No one wanted a kid with autism. Dyslexia was seen as an underachiever. Someone with dyspraxia was never going to be a high performer. Not true, but this is what the public thought. So we needed a way of rebranding it and kind of giving it a new coat of life. So Judy Singer, what a babe, in 1998, coined the term neurodiversity. And this was to start afresh. For one, it wasn't just talking about a deficit, it was talking about a way of being, a kind of just who you are, cognitive variations. It's not saying, say, autism is good nor bad, it is saying it is what it is. And that is kind of the birth of it. So a lot of you use it, very few of you use it, but do not, and a couple of you haven't. For those of you who haven't heard of neurodiversity before, we're really going to be breaking down what it is in this webinar. But in a nutshell, it's the recognition that human beings have a diverse range of thought, and there isn't one correct way of thinking, just a society that accepts one way as the dominant way. But I am going to break this down a little bit more because it's like an important thing to understand. Now, in the same year, it was already being published. It's making news. So one quote from Harvey Blume was, "Neurodiversity may be every bit as crucial for the human race as biodiversity is for life in general." Now, that is a big claim even today, but back in the 90s, this was a big, big deal. I personally agree with it. I'd love to know what you think. It's saying biodiversity, how we have all plants, nature, wildlife, and the diversity of the world creates a healthy ecosystem. Well, it's saying by having different mindsets, this is only beneficial to the human race. It isn't a deficit. It's something which kind of supports our progression and evolution. Again, some big statements, but personally, I agree with it. I think the only benefit can come from diversity. Now, up until this point, being neurodiverse, one, no one used the term much, but two, it only meant autism. And some people still see it as an autistic thing. No, it's kind of evolved since then. It's kind of branched out. As soon as people started to get wind of it, they're like, actually, I like this neurodiversity term. I want to use it. And that's how it kind of grew and grew to where it is today. So I want to know, what counts as being ND? Do any of you resonate with any of these kind of labels, diagnostic terms, and also consider yourself to be neurodiverse? We've got autism, speech disorders, dyslexia, dyspraxia, dyscalculia, dysnomia, ADHD, Tourette's. Some of these you may have heard of, others you may have never heard of, but these are all conditions, if you will, which are typically described as being neurodiverse or neurodivergent. A good way that I kind of define it is any condition which means the brain thinks differently to the majority of the population. And that would cover all of these. But that alone probably doesn't cover it fully. I would then go on to say, and isn't necessarily a disability, but is disabling by society. Interesting, a lot of you, autism, dyslexia. Actually, I thought there'd be more on dyslexia, ADHD. Oh, nice. Oh, we got a few of you with dysnomia. That's an interesting one as well. Have had to Google dysnomia, and I think I have it. Yeah, it's kind of similar to dyspraxia a little bit, but more to do with, actually, that I'll save that for another webinar, but is interesting. So these are ones which most people will agree, right? No questions, not much controversy right there. However, what about these bad boys? Are there any controversial ones here? So most people will appreciate that having a mental illness and being neurodivergent are separate things. They are not the same, but they do kind of overflow a little bit. Now, these are ones that people say, do they count as being neurodiverse? Who's allowed to join the party? Is everyone invited? Can bipolar sit with us? I don't know, but can schizophrenia? Can antisocial personality? If we are talking about neurodiversity as a very positive term about being advantage, do we really want antisocial personality disorder to hang out with us? You tell me. Because again, all of these do equal a different way of processing the world in terms of the majority of the population. But are all of these necessarily positives that have inherent strengths attached to them? This is when the definition starts to get a bit difficult. Because I normally say to people that if you would have it in a utopian society where everyone is loving and kind, would I personally choose to get rid of my dyslexia, for example? No, I would not. It's part of me and I'm proud to have it. But if you asked me if I'd get rid of my OCD, I probably would. So that's kind of where I make the differentiation. However, some people, OCD isn't as debilitating for them and they also really value it. So maybe it's a personal choice. Oh, I have synesthesia too. I'm not sure if that's also part of neurodiversity. It is. It's just very uncommon. Oh, nice. And Tim's mentioned there's also other ranges as well. It blurs around the mental health issues. Mental illness isn't ND. It It's not ND, but if you are ND, you're more likely to have mental illness because life is difficult. So though they are different, you can't really separate them completely, at least not where we are today. So with this in mind, what makes something a neurodivergent condition opposed to a mental disorder? Like, how would you personally define it? What joins our club and what doesn't join the club? Who gets a seat at the table and who has to wait on the sidelines? I'm honestly curious to know what you think on this because there really isn't a straightforward answer. Or Anya says, untreated ND and masking might cause depression and anxiety. Yep, that definitely, unfortunately, depression and anxiety does come quite heavily. Okay, we've got what makes something a neurodiverse condition opposed to a mental disorder. We've got routines. We've got, I think you're born with neurodiversity, or you can get mental illness at any time in your life. Yes, typically it is a neurodevelopmental condition, which means it is happened at birth or in the very early stages of life. Though you can get acquired neurodiversity, but that's a whole nother thing. ND is developmental, yes, where MI is later onset. That's genuinely how I explain it. You can still function in daily life. Sometimes that it's long term and does affect one's daily life. Yeah, for instance, I maybe one day might be able to get over my OCD, maybe, but I'm never going to be able to get rid of my dyspraxia. That is very much stuck with me or is part of me, depending how you view things. Neurodivergence is caused by wiring and mental illness is caused by chemical balances and often a combo of both. Yes, that's a good one. ND is sometimes awesome. Yes, I like that. Where some mental conditions, I would argue, are sometimes not awesome. Unsure as they are cubed together in medical books. Great, this is honestly such a great debate. I wish I could spend longer on each of these. Dr. Thomas Armstrong, he summed it up pretty well in my opinion. He says, neurodiversity includes an exploration of what has thus far been considered a mental disorder of neurological origin, but that may instead represent alternative forms of natural human difference. This is a really great way of putting it. So let's say it again. An exploration of what thus far has been considered mental disorders. So we're saying, let's say autism, it has been seen as a mental disorder for a lot of history, but now we are starting to reevaluate it, look again, and think, actually, maybe this is not so much a disorder, but just an alternative form of difference, which is very natural. We're always re-looking at old evidence. Think of like fossils when they'll be like, whoa, let's go back to this thing we've discovered years and years ago. And then you're like, actually, it's a completely different thing. So we're always re-evaluating. Oh, Fatima says mental illness can be cured, but ND is a lifelong condition. I mean, it really does kind of get you thinking, doesn't it? So with this, I want to know, these are some personal views, right? This is from Nick Walker, and he's a really great advocate of neurodiversity and autism. Do you agree with these views? The first one is neurodiversity is a biological characteristic of the human species. This is not a perspective. So this is a pure fact, is what he's saying. Do you agree or not agree? And the second one, neurodiversity is an essential form of human diversity. Okay, we've got a lot of like definitely's. This is where it gets interesting. So the first one, if anyone was to ask you, you can't deny neurodiversity, fact, is a biological characteristic of the human species. It is a characteristic. You can't say it isn't. It is. The second one, however, is an opinion. Is it opinion you believe? Very well might be, but it's still an opinion. Neurodiversity is an essential form of human diversity. That is harder to prove. But it's important to know when like the people who aren't completely on board, we are not saying, by saying neurodiversity, we are not saying it is an essential form of human diversity. That is debatable. But we are saying it definitely is a characteristics of being human. Now, when the like neurodiversity has been progressing and developing, there were some like pillars that were created to really summarize what it means, why we use the term neurodiversity rather than disability. And these are the 4 pillars. And I want you to rank which ones you think are the most crucial to you. So we've got a range from honoring the authentic forms of human diversity, self-expression, being rather than treatment, not conforming to a clinical idea. These were the four main reasons why this term was created and why it still sticks around today. And you could argue that disability just doesn't cover it when you're looking at these pillars. So the first one is self-expression. Nice, a way to talk about yourself in a way that isn't detrimental or belittling. Being rather than treatment. Yep, rather than saying, I'm hoping to get this fixed someone, you just are. Honoring authentic forms of human diversity. Nice. Again, let's not shame us for having a different mindset. And the last one we got, not conforming to a clinical idea. That is because, remember, the original labels of dyslexic, dyspraxic are clinical definitions, and we are not clinical people. We are human beings. So that's typically one of the main areas. Hopefully you're all doing good at the moment, right? Okay, I'm going to take that as a yes. Now, I want you to tell me what is the difference between being neurodiverse and neurodivergent. Because you are going to hear people using these words interchangeably, even myself, all the time. But if we're getting really down to the detail, there is a difference. So any idea on what is the difference between being neurodiverse and neurodivergent? No idea. I like the honesty. Not sure. Neurodiverse includes neurotypical people. It's about the diversity of the human condition. Bing, bing, bing. Correct. We got it. No, there is a difference. So neurodiverse includes neurotypical people. It's about the diversity of the human condition. Autumn says diverse refers to a range, divergent refers to a sector. What is termed normal way of being in society and what doesn't fit in is my experience, different ways of being and reacting. Endiv is one mental condition change. Okay, really great. That is very similar to what I've got. So on here is individuals whose neurology differs substantially from the dominant norms are neurodivergent. So neurodiversity is just the general name for brain diversity. We're all different. Neurodiverse is saying that everyone who has a unique brain that isn't a complete carbon copy is neurodiverse. And neurodivergent is someone who has a substantially different cognitive functions and neurology from the standard. So yes, every single person you've ever met has a different brain. That is very true. But if your brain is so different from what is considered normal in society, that is when you'd get this different kind of label or kind of thing of neurodivergent. So if you have autism, you are neurodivergent, you are also neurodiverse, and you can relate to being neurodiversity. If you are neurotypical, you'd also be neurodiverse. Hopefully that makes sense. Now, why might neurodiversity be a controversial word? We've talked a lot about why these old labels are a bit out of touch, out of date. But to be honest, not everyone likes this term. Why might some people just not like it? And this happened to me just last week. I was delivering a talk and to some children, and a parent did not want their child attending because we're using the word neurodiversity, and they didn't agree with it. Oh, Anastasia says, so are all humans neurodiverse? Yes, all humans are neurodiverse. That just means we all think individually and different. But only people with, say, autism, dyslexia, etc., are neurodivergent. Again, people use these terms interchangeably, but that's what it means if we're getting right down to it. So why might people find neurodiversity to be a controversial word? People don't like change. Yep. Particularly in our community. New labels, old stigma, carries across. A label is still a label. Too broad and implies everyone is on a spectrum. I'm not sure. Sounds similar to neurotypical, which also could be a controversial word. Yes, and we are going to talk a bit about neurotypical. People are misinformed, like the R word, belittling, associate and abnormal, denial. Yeah, do you know what? It's this and all of these and more. Words are changing all the time. This is an empowering word today, but who knows what it's going to be tomorrow. And so, one of the things that we experience a lot of exceptional individuals is people resonate with, say, one condition, like I am dyslexic. Now, being kind of lumped together with, say, autism, OCD, etc., that's just not how they personally resonate with. So as someone said, it is too broad. Now, the main kind of argument I would say to counteract that is people confuse the neurodiversity paradigm and the neurodiversity movement with the biological fact of neurodiversity. This needs a bit of explaining, but it's interesting. The biological fact of neurodiversity, remember, we said that is true. You cannot deny that. Human brains are all different. We all have our own variations. That is a fact. Now, the paradigm and the movement is saying it's a really positive thing. It's essential for human development. So when we're talking about neurodiversity in general, we are talking about the biological fact. And it's when these two get confused is when people normally have negative views towards it. So that parent who didn't let their child attend my workshop was because she thought I was promoting it as a benefit. Like, we should have more people with autism in society. I might not personally disagree with that statement, but that wasn't what my workshop was about. My workshop was on about the biological facts that our brains are all different. Now, with that in mind, as someone rightly mentioned, they're still labels at the end of the day. Why or why not do we even need these labels such as autistic, dyslexic, neurodivergent, whether or not these are empowering words, diagnostic words, old words, new words? Do we still need labels? Okay, access to support. Nice to get support, to allow for people to be considerate. So individuals can access support because society believes everyone should conform, and it's the only way we can scream about why we don't. Maybe to allow others to acknowledge it. Being ND can isolate, and it can also help that there are people out there like you to identify ways to show we are different. Okay, brilliant. Government and medical. Oh, sweet. One of the key reasons, you're right, is these labels are created in order to help people. Though labels cannot be very useful because stigma is attached to them, in their rawest form, they give people a starting point. If you said to me, oh, hi, I have ADHD, I cannot give you a bag of suggestions on what's going to help you. But what I can do is have some ideas, which is a starting point. Without a label, it's very difficult knowing where to begin. If someone told me they had autism, at least I would have an idea of what I could do as a starting point. But by not having any label at all, it makes it very difficult in order to find the support. It can save a lot of time. All these reasons do have merit. Or Anna says, yes, it gives me an idea of what person might have difficulties with, so I can adjust my behavior. Now, are these labels a bit broad? Absolutely. But they also give a starting point. The use of language gives a negative connotation. Even classing them as labels could do that. They are a description or a disorientation. Now, moving on nicely to the civil rights and neurodiversity movement. We spoke about these different views, and now we've got some people who are really pushing this and saying, yes, stop seeing us as a negative. We are just we. And this is where the movement comes in. We are getting more and more controversial as we go along because these are things that become less scientific and more personal opinion. So the movement, which essentially are people who really believe that it's a benefit to society and it isn't something that we could control, want to show that autism, and they do mostly refer to autism, but again, the definition is expanding, is often belittled and made to feel that they can't live their own lives. A lot of you have already said that today. Typical ways aren't always the right way. This is about changing people's perceptions on what is right. Diagnostics created for the convenience of others and to change that. That's an interesting one. Diagnosis weren't created for neurodiverse people to help neurodiverse people. It was created for neurotypical people to help support, medicate, drug, make choices on our behalf. So it wasn't created for us. No, it wasn't created with us. It was created for us. And then comorbidities of the diagnosis are what often create exclusion, not the neurology. So what this is saying is, I don't really care that my brain is wired different. That's not the problem here. Society is the problem. It's the way people treat me is the problem. So let's stop focusing on how my brain is wired and let's focus on the mirror and see why people treat us the way we do. Now, some of the key aims of this movement is to acknowledge that ND doesn't require a cure. One day there may be a cure, but it doesn't need a cure. We're not looking for a cure. In our minds, it is just how we are. It's society that needs the cure. We want to change the language from disease, disorder, because again, it paints a negative picture. It sets the bar awfully low. These are words that no one wants to resonate with. And that's something they want to change. Widen the understanding or what it means to healthy living. You can have autism and live a very beautiful, beautiful life. It doesn't mean that you are damned to a life of benefits and on the curbs and not meeting your potential. You can do anything in life, given the right opportunities. And ND individuals want more control over their treatment if needed. So let's say you have ADHD, you should be able to choose whether or not you want medication. For some people, it's the right choice. For others, it is not. And I'm curious to know for all of you, because whenever you talk about medication, people get a little bit, oh, I don't know. Having medication doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with you. It just might help you, support you in certain areas. Like I have medication for my OCD and it just allows me to focus a bit more. And I'm okay with that. But I would never put that on anyone else and say it's definitely needed. Now, if any of you are not currently familiar with this chap, Steve Silberman, I 100% recommend you pick up his book, NeuroTribes, and give it a read. It's a beast of a book, but it's by far one of the best books I've ever read. And he says the word neurodiversity was coined at a time when autism, ADHD, dyslexia, and other cognitive variations were only defined as inferior and diseased. And so had we have not had these negative views of these words, neurodiversity would not have been created. So if you ever meet someone who doesn't like the terms, it honestly wouldn't have been created had society not already been so negative and detrimental to this kind of way of being that they apparently like 1 in 7 people in the UK would come under that title. Or we've got, sadly, most people always see me as a child or read malice into everything I say. Or Tim says, those with high support needs are obviously dependent on others, the level of care / support or quality of life. Man, it is interesting, isn't it? But it can also make your blood get a little bit like hot. You can see I'm getting awfully passionate. Now we're going to go a bit more onto functioning levels. I know we are covering a lot today, so I appreciate this is a lot of information to take in. Functioning levels is another concept of neurodiversity. It's something that we have created in order to help people understand us. One of the biggest criticisms of these labels is that they're too broad. What does it mean, autism? So this is when we started carving it up and giving different labels. Oh, so you have ADHD, you have ADD, you have ASD, you have Asperger's, high functioning, low functioning, level 1, level 2. And we started to try and make it easier for people to understand. Now, while it was done with the world's best intentions, unfortunately, a lot of negative results came from it. And this is what we're going to look at. Why is this such a controversial idea? High or low functioning. So before we get into whether or not this is good or bad, because I know some of you probably already know the answer, I want you to tell me what you think counts as low functioning and what you think counts as high functioning. So if you can talk, are you low or high functioning? If you talk via alternative means, so it could be sign language, it could be writing, it could be anything, including typing, low or high functioning. If you can speak, but you're not easily understood, or if you struggle to process spoken conversation. Okay, so those who can talk are often considered high functioning. Those who talk in alternative ways are normally considered low. Can speak but not understood, low. Struggle to produce spoken conversation, low. This is wrong. Okay, this is how we used to define it. And this is one of the key reasons why we no longer use functioning sliding scales. Because if you notice, though a lot of people who I know would technically be considered low functioning, there's this connotation that low functioning has low cognitive abilities. It, like, people think if you're low functioning, you have low intelligence. That is not true, but that is what people think. If you say high functioning, you're seen as better, as kind of like more valuable to society. Low functioning, you're kind of seen as a drain on resources. It's not true, but that's what people think. There also comes a little bit of history to Nazis, again, where like Hitler wanted like the super race. And if you were high functioning, brilliant, he would train you to be a super soldier. Low functioning, to the chambers. So it's wrong on multiple levels, but it's important to know that. Emma mentions Rayman, absolutely. And I mean, I was technically classified as high functioning, though it is not an official term. But to be honest with you, I would more often than not avoid it. So Stefanie Sacks, who has autism, kind of claims it as this. Functioning levels is a bad word. For us who are not super high functioning, like self-declared groups or ones doing so well they need little or no help. It creates a hierarchy. Nobody wants that. Anna says, I say high functioning equals better at masking. That is a good way of putting it, actually. I still would rather not use the term because of like what it's connected to, but I do think that's a better way of wording it for sure. Now, as we talked about, the word neurodiversity only exists for one reason, because all the other words we use to talk about difference were seen as negative. Being neurodiverse is about being strong, about being a strength, about a positive approach. With that in mind, should those people whose functioning levels are really severe and they struggle with day-to-day life, should they be included under the term neurodiverse or neurodivergent? Yes, no, I don't know. This gets a bit difficult, doesn't it? Because if we're talking about things just being a difference and not a negative, then I don't know. But some people with autism, their life is really, really challenging, and we should not diminish that. Their challenge is real. So is it right to give them a label that is about the strength side of it? Well, let's have a look in that, because it's not as easy as you'd first think. Most of you say no. Interestingly, I would say it's probably yeah. Now, Nick Walker, again, back to him, great chap. He says neurodiversities refer to this: pervasive neurocognitive differences. There's so many big words today. Persuasive neurocognitive differences that are intimately related to the formation and constitution of the self, in contrast to medical conditions such as epilepsy. So with this in mind, yes, absolutely. No matter how your neurodivergence, autism, etc. affects you, you are still neurodiverse, because neurodiverse isn't referring to good nor bad. It's just referring to difference. And it's also saying it isn't a condition. It's not something you carry. It is who you are. So if the way your brain thinks is very intimately connected to your own personal identification and identity, then you are neurodiverse. It has nothing to do with ability or kind of like what you can and can't do in life. So yes, let's see what some of the comments are, because I appreciate this getting some deep stuff. If it is severe and affects your life that much, doesn't it become a mental disorder? No, it's still not a mental disorder. You are more likely to have co-occurring mental conditions, but it is not. If it affects you quite deeply, then it's still part of who you are. So again, you may or may not agree with that. It's still kind of up for discussion, but this is kind of what most people in the neurodiversity movement will believe. Now, if we are talking about how everyone kind of comes under this, this umbrella, do we include people who are neurotypical as well? And for those who have never heard the term neurotypical, it just means people who are not dyslexic, autistic, dyspraxic, those who have a more regular way of processing information. Remember how we said people who are neurodiverse, which is everyone, we all think differently. No one's arguing that, but the way you think differently isn't as like widespread as those who say have autism or dyslexia. Now, if we are all different, is there such a thing as being neurotypical? So we've got some say yes, some say no, some say depends. It's all over the place. I quite like this diagram because it gives you an idea of the so-called spectrum. So first of all, you've got autism. Autism is a very diverse neurology. It is more different than any of the other ones. Now, if you do not meet those criteria, say if your autism is, you find it easier to mask, you don't have as many challenges in day to day, you might be more atypical. So while you might not fit the definition of autism exactly, you still have a lot of traits that are related. If you have, say, dyslexia, dyspraxia, you'd be neurodivergent, where a lot of similar traits to those who have autism, but not the same kind of challenges or traits in day-to-day life. Then you've got neurotypical people, and then you've got the non-autistics, people whose brains are definitely a bit different. They don't quite conform to the norm, but definitely do not kind of fall into the neurodivergent category. Again, though not perfect, I think this is quite an interesting way of putting it. Oh, Christian says we put the spice in life. We share our gifts with others, but not everyone likes curry. The curry folks try to battle us and put us down. An interesting way of looking at it, but yeah. Okay, we're almost getting to the end now. So a quick breakdown. Oh, nice. I call myself neurospicy. I like that, Emma. So a quick roundup. Neuro means neurology, neural pathways, how our brain kind of is connected to each other. Diversity just means variation. So neurodiversity does mean everyone on the planet. And neurodivergent means people like most of us here today. So a few takeaways. When we're talking about neurodiversity, particularly as the movement or the paradigm, we're talking about people who are against the cure, people who promote support systems, helping people live their best life. We're looking at that our challenges are inseparable from the strengths. It means you can't have all the goodies if you don't take some of the challenges. They are one. So if you want the best of us, like these superpowers, which people like to talk about, you have to accept the challenges and support us. And it is society that creates disability. It's not difference that creates disability or exclusion. So I think it's a nice thing to end on. To finish off with, if any of you do resonate with being neurodiverse and are in the workplace, we do have lots and lots of support available. One of our things is we offer support for those in work. We can get grant and funding in order to give you additional training or equipment. So do get in contact with that. If you have any questions, I encourage you to ask them, put them out, put any statements. And then what we say, Danielle says, will we get a copy of this recording? For us moving who are dyslexic, this is moving very quickly. Daniela, I appreciate it is moving very quickly. There was a lot of content today. Doesn't the atypical neurology come from a combination of different types of neurodiversity, e.g. someone who has both ADHD and autism who present differently from someone who has other than autism? Yes, no, having multiple can be called co-occurring or comorbidity, and it definitely makes it more challenging and they can kind of go against each other. This is why having one definition of what it is to have autism isn't very helpful, because we all have our own kind of background, nature, nurture, conditions, disorders, health reasons that are all kind of like bundled up together. So it's very difficult to give one firm thing. Oh, Indigo says, thanks, Nat. Enjoyed this. A bit confusing. It was a confusing one today, I'll be honest with you. So do not feel bad if you're like, I have no idea. It is recorded so we can rewatch again. For those who thought, this is interesting, I wouldn't mind learning a bit more this year. The one we're doing next week is on the history of madness. And this is really, really interesting. And I loved researching this one. Neurodiversity, we talked about being the new term. The old term was like things like dyslexia, dyspraxia, which was about kind of treating a disorder. Before then, now we're going back in the past, it was about insanity. It was about madness. It was about witchcraft. So we're looking about how history has looked at us back in the day. So this is a really good webinar that will complement today. Go on our website or Eventbrite. We also have lots of videos on our YouTube channel. Just type Exceptional Individuals into YouTube, and that's how you can catch up on all our videos and learn more, because there's a lot of information to digest. And if you're anything like me, this took me months and months to research because it was a really detailed subject. And we're at the end. All right, everyone, that was a lot of information in a very short amount of time. So great work on all of you for staying engaged. And thank you so much for all these great comments. Oh, thanks everyone for the lovely feedback. Cool, thanks everyone. Okay, I'm going to leave it there for today, but hopefully I'll see you all next week. Thanks everyone for attending.